I can still hear the phrase echoing in my head as if it had been shouted 5 seconds ago. "You are nobody!" My own son, his face red with rage, his hands trembling, his breath short and heavy, like a bull about to charge. The door between us was open, but it seemed as if an abyss had opened up in the middle of the room, separating father and son, blood and blood, love and pain. I never thought I would hear that from him. Never. Those words pierced my chest like an arrow launched without mercy. There was no warning, no pause, no space to defend myself, just the dry, cruel explosion, which left an even more violent silence afterward. I stood there, paralyzed. I couldn't speak, breathe, or move. The world around me seemed to shrink, to become smaller, as if everything were losing its color. The walls, which had always witnessed our dinners, our laughter, our birthdays, suddenly became cold, strange, almost hostile. And my son, the one I held for the first time with hands trembling with joy, now looked at me as if I were a burden, a nothing, a nuisance in his life. He turned his face away with disdain, like someone turning away from something that causes shame. And that gesture hurt more than the words. It hurt as if something inside me was breaking, something I don't know if it will ever be whole again. As he spoke, I tried to understand how we got to that point. When did our relationship begin to crack? What detail did I miss? What could I have done differently? But no, answers came. Only that hard look, laden with frustration, and that cruel sentence, uttered with all the force a young adult can muster when he feels his own life doesn't live up to expectations. It was as if he were taking out all his failures, all his disappointments, all the pressures of the world on me, and I became the perfect target, the father who had always been there, easy to hit, impossible to escape. Shock overwhelmed me. I remembered the nights he woke up crying and I rushed to hold him. I remembered when he fell off his bike and I was desperate. I remembered the homework I corrected, the conversations we had in the car, the times he whispered his fears to me, as if trusting me was natural. And now I was nobody. How could a story spanning so many years transform into something like this in just a few seconds? I felt my heart race, not from anger, but from sadness. There are pains that are silent, but make a noise inside the soul that no one can ignore. My pain at that moment was exactly that. Silent on the outside, devastating on the inside. And at the same time, a part of me knew that perhaps that cry wasn't entirely about me. Perhaps it was about him, about what he was feeling, about what he didn't know how to express. Still, that didn't lessen the impact. It didn't lessen the damage. I tried to speak. I tried to open my mouth to say his name, to ask him to calm down, to say that I was there, that he could talk to me without destroying me. But no, words came out. My throat tightened. My mind was scrambled. It was as if the person I loved most had pushed me off a mountain, and I was falling with nothing to hold on to. And the most terrible thing is that, even so, my natural reflex was to protect him as I fell, even knowing that he was the one who had pushed me. Time seemed to stretch out. He was still standing, still breathing fast, but now there was something in his eyes besides anger. Maybe fear, maybe insecurity, maybe something he himself didn't understand. And me? I just wanted to understand what was happening to my boy. I wanted to hug him, but it was impossible. There was an emotional wall there that I couldn't get through. When he finally left the room, slamming the door behind him, an eerie silence filled the house. A silence that wasn't empty. It was heavy. Heavy as hours and hours of memories, as expectations that were never fulfilled, as dreams I had for him that perhaps he never even noticed. I stood there, staring at the floor, feeling as if that moment defined not only our present, but the entire future of our relationship. And then, for the first time in my life, I thought, did I really mean nothing to him? Did everything I did mean nothing? That question kept hammering in my mind, like a cruel reminder, a ghost that wouldn't leave me. Little did I know that a few hours later, someone would arrive to show me that the truth was completely different, and that my son was about to find out in the most unexpected way possible. The truth is, that my son's scream didn't just appear out of nowhere that afternoon. It was merely the final explosion of something that had been building up for months, perhaps years, and I, out of love or blindness, refused to see it. If I go back in time a little, I can see the signs slowly emerging, like discrete cracks in a wall that we insist on believing is solid. First came the distance, that strange silence that began to appear between one sentence and another, between one meal and another, between a good morning and a good night. Before, he would sit with me at the table and tell me about his day, complain about something, laugh about something else. Suddenly, he stopped talking. He would grab his plate, eat quickly, often looking at his cell phone, and disappear into his room. When I knocked on the door to ask if everything was all right, he would answer with short phrases. "I'm fine. We'll talk later." "Not now, Dad, Mom." And I, wanting to respect his space, would back away. I thought, it's just a phase. He's busy. His life is hectic. And so, without realizing it, I accepted that our daily conversations were becoming a rarity. The coldness also started gradually. It wasn't like flipping a switch. It was more like dimming the flame on a stove until it almost went out. He stopped texting me during the day, stopped asking for my opinion, stopped showing me his plans. Before anything was reason enough for him to come, running to tell me, a successful project, an inside joke with friends, a small achievement. Over time, all of that faded away. I found myself, without realizing it, being removed from his life like someone slowly fading from a photograph. And then came the little arguments. At first, they were silly things. Curfew, disorganization, responsibilities, bills, noise, normal everyday things. But the tone changed. He no longer just said, "Okay, I see that." He retorted irritably, "You don't understand. You complain about everything. All you do is point out mistakes." And, at times, I also lost my patience. I responded harshly, said things I later regretted. The truth is, when two hurt people speak without listening, words become weapons. I started noticing that he looked at me differently. It wasn't that look of admiration and trust anymore. It was a look mixed with resentment and disappointment, as if in his mind I had promised something back then and hadn't delivered. Maybe he expected me to be someone more successful, more admired, more important in the eyes of the world. Maybe he was comparing our life to the lives of other families, other parents, other houses, other cars, other jobs. And in this cruel game of comparison, I became, for him, the epitome of failure. This doesn't mean I didn't work, that I didn't fight, that I didn't give my best. On the contrary, I lived my whole life doing what I could with what I had. But for him, that seemed like little. Every overdue bill, every financial hardship, every "I can't buy that right now" became evidence against me in the silent court he set up in his mind. And I, without realizing it, accepted the blame for things that were beyond my control. Small arguments began to turn into barriers. Things that could have been conversations became confrontations. I would talk about responsibility. He would hear demands. I would talk about boundaries. He would hear control. I would talk about care. He would hear invasion. And, little by little, we started walking around the same house like two strangers, trying not to bump into each other to avoid another storm. The atmosphere became heavy, just being in the same room. Any poorly chosen word could light the fuse. There was one particular night when this became very clear to me. I was in the living room, sitting, shuffling some papers, trying to organize the finances. He walked by, grabbed his keys, and said he was going out. Worried, I simply asked, "Where are you going? What time will you be back?" I didn't shout. I didn't ask suspiciously. I asked like a parent who still tries to take care of things. He stopped, turned to me, and replied curtly, "Why do you want to know? You never understood my life anyway." That sentence was like an invisible slap. I didn't answer. I just watched him leave, slamming the door, and I stayed there, with the feeling that, in his mind, I had already lost the right to ask even the simplest questions. Things started to change too. He brought fewer friends home. He seemed ashamed of me. of our simple way of life, of our reality. Sometimes I would hear him talking on the phone with someone, saying things that cut me to the core. No, we can't do it here at home today. My dad, Mom is kind of complicated. Or worse, I'll explain later. It's confusing here. I wondered, what could he be saying about me? But I never had the courage to ask. Instead, I kept the pain to myself and pretended not to hear. Despite all these signs, I never imagined he would go so far as to call me nobody. In my mind, it was an exaggeration, a limit that would never be crossed, an invisible line of respect that, even on the worst days, would remain. I thought that, however angry he was, he would still remember everything we had lived through, everything we had been through together. I believed there was something solid between us, a foundation of love that, although shaken, would still sustain our relationship. But inside, I was tired too. Tired of being misunderstood, tired of only being seen for my mistakes, tired of feeling that all the effort of a lifetime had become invisible to the very people I most wanted to see it. At times, I confess, I thought about giving up trying to talk. I thought about keeping quiet, about letting time solve everything. But time, when not accompanied by dialogue, doesn't heal. It only deepens the distance. Today, looking back, I can see clearly something was very wrong with him. It wasn't just rebellion. It wasn't just ill will. There was frustration, pressure, perhaps shame, perhaps fear of facing his own life. And I, without having the right tools, without really knowing how to reach his heart at that stage, unintentionally drifted away. I remained physically present, but emotionally, it seemed like we each lived in a different world. Even though the relationship had grown cold, even though the words between us had become sharp, I never, not for a second, imagined that I would hear that sentence from my son's mouth. You are nobody. I thought that pain had a limit. I discovered that day that it doesn't. And it was just when I thought it couldn't hurt anymore that the universe decided to intervene in a way I could never have predicted, a way that would forever change how it saw me. The trigger for that fight wasn't anything grand, no tragic event or shocking revelation. Ironically, it was something simple, a conversation that, in any other house, might have ended with an, "Okay, I'll see later." But in ours, it became a ticking time bomb. It all started that morning, an ordinary morning, seemingly peaceful, but laden with silent tensions. I woke up early as usual and noticed he was late again. Or rather, he'd arrived almost at dawn. The hallway lights were still on, showing he'd spent the night pacing back and forth, irritated by something he hadn't told me, but which I felt had been building up inside him like an impossible weight to bear. When he finally got up, close to the time to leave, I called him into the kitchen. I spoke in a calm tone, choosing my words carefully because I already knew he was sensitive, reactive, and easily angered. I just wanted to talk, understand what was happening, and at the same time, set a boundary that I felt was necessary. I said something like, "Son, you're going to get lost this way. Coming home almost at dawn won't solve anything. If something is bothering you, talk to me. I can help. But you need to get organized. You need to take care of your life, your schedule, your responsibilities." He stopped, took a deep breath, and looked at me with that hard look that was becoming increasingly common. I wasn't accusing him, I wasn't arguing, I was trying to help. But, in his mind, it sounded like yet another demand, another criticism, another proof that I was an obstacle, not a support. He replied curtly, "You know nothing about my life." Still, I kept trying, because that's what a parent does, tries, even when they realize the door is almost closing. I said, "I know things can be difficult. I'm not perfect, but I've always been here. And this path you're taking, it leads nowhere." It was at that moment that everything crumbled. He exploded. His face turned red, his breathing quickened, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger, frustration, and, though he would never admit it, fear. It was as if I had touched exactly the place he was trying to hide. He slammed his hands on the table and shouted, "You want to talk about my life? My journey? My aimlessness? Look at yourself." Silence settled for a second, heavy, menacing, like the air before thunder. I felt the ground tremble inside me, but I remained there, firm. It was then that he said the phrase that hurt more than any scream, more than any slammed door, more than any ignored words in recent months. The phrase, so harsh, didn't seem to come from him, but from some deep pain he carried. He shouted, "You haven't accomplished anything in life?" "Nothing." I felt my whole body freeze. I couldn't answer. My mind spun, trying to understand the reason for such a cruel accusation. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't about success. It was about value, about dignity, about who I was, or about who, at that moment, he believed I wasn't. To see your own life reduced to nothing by the son you raised, it's a pain beyond words. I felt a physical impact, as if the air had been ripped from my lungs. I felt a mixture of sadness, shock, and, above all, injustice. Because he had no idea what I went through to ensure he had the basics, to give him opportunities I never had, to keep him protected even when I myself was crumbling inside. But in his mind, I was just the epitome of failure. He saw me as someone who never shone, never achieved anything great, never went anywhere. And the worst part is that he spoke with such conviction that I realized how deeply ingrained that view was in him. He continued, "I grew up seeing everyone else having more than us, parents who gave their children a future, parents who did something, who achieved something, and you've lived your whole life the same way, working just to survive, without dreams, without ambition." Each word was a new stab, and although painful, I could feel their origin, comparison, pressure, shame. He wasn't just talking about me. He was talking about himself. The frustration of not having reached where he imagined, the pressure of looking around and feeling like he was falling behind, the bitter feeling that his own future was being crushed by the fear of repeating my life. I tried to take a deep breath to try to explain, but all I could manage to say was, "Son, you don't know my story. You don't know the battles I had to fight to raise you." But he wouldn't listen. He shouted back, "I don't want to hear your excuses." That's when I understood. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the very shadow of failure he saw reflected in me. Because for him, accepting that I did what I could meant accepting that life is sometimes hard, unfair, limiting, and he wasn't ready for that. It was easier to blame me. The argument escalated quickly. He started speaking loudly, gesturing wildly, throwing every frustration he carried in my face, turning my entire life into an argument to validate his pain. And even knowing he was hurt, it wounded me in an indescribable way. After all, everything I did, even the failures, even the mistakes, I did trying to do the right thing. When he finally screamed again, with more force, more resentment, more pain, "You are nobody!" It was as if the whole world around me collapsed, because at that moment I realized that my son didn't see who I was. He only saw what he thought I hadn't been, and it was from that point, from that dark emotional depth, that fate decided to intervene, because hours later someone would come knocking on my door to prove exactly the opposite, and my son would be forced to see. When the door finally slammed shut behind him, with that dry bang that sounded more like the period at the end of a sentence written in anger, the whole house seemed to lose its sound. It was as if all the walls had absorbed the impact of the argument and decided to return only emptiness. An emptiness that wasn't simply the absence of noise, it was the presence of pain. I stood there, not knowing where to look, not knowing what to do with my hands, my heart, my mind. It was as if every corner of the house had echoed that terrible phrase, repeating it endlessly until it stuck to me like an involuntary tattoo. "You are nobody." The silence was so absolute I could almost hear my own breath faltering. The sound of the refrigerator, which was always in the background, seemed to have vanished. The clock on the wall, which ticked the hours with an irritating tick, also fell silent. The world stopped, and I stood there in the middle of the room, feeling my whole body weigh as if it had aged years in minutes. His phrase kept coming back, 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 not because I wanted to remember, but because it had pierced so deeply that my brain seemed incapable of thinking of anything else. I sat down slowly, as if afraid of breaking my own body. The chair made a small, almost timid creak, as if even the furniture were hesitant to make a sound in that newly destroyed environment. I rested my elbows on my knees and put my hands to my face. The whole scene seemed surreal. How had that boy, the one who held my finger with his tiny hand when he was a baby, become the adult who said such a cruel thing to me? What did I do wrong? Where did I lose him? The question that struck me first was exactly this. Did I fail as a parent? And it didn't come gently, it didn't come as a philosophical question, it came as a sentence. As if, in that instant, everything I had ever tried, everything I had ever done, all the invisible sacrifices, had been erased at once. And the worst part is that, in the silence of the house, that question seemed to gain strength, grow, become a monster ready to devour me. I tried to remember good moments, everything I did for him, but even the good memories now seemed tinged with doubt. I wondered if I should have been firmer, or more lenient, more present, or less controlling. Did I make a mistake? Did I fail to guide him? Should I have lived a different life so that he could be proud of me? The truth is, at that moment, any path I considered seemed to point to the same painful conclusion. Maybe I failed. The silence didn't help. On the contrary, it amplified everything. Every negative thought gained an echo. Every insecurity took shape. What he had said wasn't just an attack on my past. It was an attack on my identity. You are nobody. That wasn't just about my journey. It was about who I was as a person, as a human being, as a father-mother. And I started to wonder about the second most painful thing. Could it be that I am truly nothing? That's when I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Shame. Not the shame of a mistake, of guilt, but existential shame. The kind that makes you look at yourself and wonder if you're worth anything. It's the kind of shame that arises when someone you love points at you and says you're less, that you're insufficient, that you're invisible. It hurt because it came from him, because deep down, I always thought that regardless of all the problems, I was still someone, to him, someone who mattered, someone worthy of respect. I got up slowly and walked to the hallway. The house seemed bigger, colder, emptier. Each photograph hanging on the wall, of birthdays, of simple trips, of moments when we still had contact, now seemed to mock me. Look how happy you two were. Where did that go wrong? I touched the picture frames with my fingertips and wondered if he still remembered those moments, or if, in his eyes, it had all been just a collection of failures disguised as attempts. I went to his room. The door was ajar. The bed was unmade, clothes were scattered about, the window was still open, letting in a cold wind. It was as if the space reflected exactly what was happening inside him. Disorder, haste, carelessness, confusion. I looked for a few seconds, resisting the urge to tidy something, to put clothes back in their place, to pull the blanket. I did nothing. I felt I no longer had permission to do so, as if any gesture of mine would be interpreted as an invasion. I left, closing the door slowly, like someone saying goodbye to something they don't know if they'll ever get back. I went back into the living room and sat on the sofa. I ran my hand over my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I let a tear fall. Not from anger, not from wounded pride, but from grief. Grief for a relationship that seemed to be dying. Grief for a love he could no longer see. Grief for myself, for everything I tried to be and, according to him, wasn't. And one question kept burning in my mind. What does he see when he looks at me? Does he see the father, mother, who cared for him, who fought for him, who sacrificed for him? Or does he only see what he thinks I haven't achieved? I felt so small at that moment that it seemed like I could fit in a corner of the room, a dark corner, silent, forgotten, and perhaps, just perhaps, that was exactly how he saw me. I stood there, motionless, until I felt my thoughts begin to unravel, as if I were trapped in the same painful loop, unsure how to escape. I had no idea that while I was drowning in these questions, fate was already preparing something to show me that I was wrong. that I was nobody, that my life had more value than I even imagined. But at that moment, all I had was silence. Silence and pain. Silence and the suffocating feeling that perhaps I had lost my son. I didn't know that in just a few hours a knock on the door would change everything, and that the world outside would show my son a truth he could never deny. The silence of that day was so heavy, it felt as if the house itself was breathing slowly, afraid to make any sudden movement. I was still sitting on the sofa, trying to understand how my life had turned upside down in so few hours, when something different began to happen. At first so subtly that I thought it was just my imagination. But, as the minutes passed, I realized it wasn't a coincidence. It was as if the universe was changing the temperature of the air, adjusting the scene for something I couldn't foresee, but which I felt was approaching. It all started with a faint sound, tires rolling slowly on the asphalt, much slower than any ordinary car would pass on that dead-end street. My house was in a simple, quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other, and that's precisely why anything out of the ordinary caught my attention. I raised my head and looked out the window, my mind still a mess, and saw a large black car gleaming as if it had been washed minutes before. It wasn't a neighbor's car. It wasn't a delivery truck. It wasn't anyone's car from that side of town. He drove by too slowly, slow, almost calculated, and he didn't seem to be looking for an address. He seemed to be observing. I frowned. It wasn't common to see cars like that there. I turned my head slightly, following the movement through the gaps in the curtain, but the car continued on and turned the corner without haste. For a few seconds, I thought it was just some lost driver. But there was something about the way he moved that didn't seem random to me. It was as if he were scouting the terrain, measuring the area, assessing it. I tried to push the thought away and sat back down, but before I was fully seated, I heard voices on the sidewalk. Neighbors talking. Nothing new, but the tone was whispered, curious, pointing, strangely interested. I got up again and went to the door, opening it just enough to hear better. They were two ladies who lived next. Door, always very observant, always attentive to the slightest movement on the street. They were leaning towards each other, speaking softly. "Did you see that car? Cars like that never pass by here." "That's right." And it passed slowly, very slowly, as if it were looking for someone, or someone important, right? Because a car like that doesn't come to visit just anyone. The final sentence practically made me swallow hard. Important. Me, important? It didn't make sense. Still, it affected me. I felt a restlessness in my chest, as if a small spark of anticipation had arisen amidst the pain I still carried from the fight. But I quickly extinguished it. It was easier to believe it was nothing, that my mind was tired, that I was trying to give meaning to what had none. I closed the door and went back inside, but the feeling had changed. The air seemed thicker. I didn't know if it was the memory of the argument with my son that was still consuming me, or if something was actually approaching. I tried to take a deep breath, to calm myself, but that's when I heard another sound, hurried footsteps outside. They weren't the footsteps of children playing, nor of someone walking their dog. They were firm, adult, determined steps. I passed by the window again, discreetly, without wanting to seem like I was spying on my own street. Two people were standing on the other side, pointing at my house. I didn't recognize either of them. They weren't residents. One of them was holding a clipboard or a black folder. The other, a cell phone, as if checking some kind of information. They were speaking softly, but it was clear they were there for a specific reason, and that they had written something down about it. My house. My heart raced. I didn't understand anything. What could be happening there? I tried to push the thoughts away again. Maybe it was something related to the neighborhood, the city hall, some future construction project, who knows? But before I could formulate any plausible hypothesis, an even stranger detail happened. They looked directly in my direction, not at the window, at me, as if they knew I was there, as if they were trying to confirm who I was. And then they simply left, just like that, out of nowhere, as if what they needed to see had already been seen. The feeling that remained with me was impossible to ignore. Something was changing. I felt it in my bones, in the air, in the silence that was no longer the same as before. It was no longer the painful silence of the fight. It was a silence of expectation, of preamble, as if the whole world were holding its breath, waiting for the next move. I sat down again, but now restless, alert, as if every sound in the house had gained importance. The refrigerator made its noise again. The clock struck the hours again. But now all of this seemed like a setting for something bigger, unusual, unexpected, as if my life were about to turn another page, a page I would never have the courage to write, alone. And then came the strangest sign of all. The neighbor's dog, the one that spent the day barking at anyone who dared to approach, was standing still, silent, staring fixedly at the end of the street. It didn't growl, didn't bark, didn't move. It just watched, as if it were sensing something I couldn't yet see. At that moment, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't fear. It was a premonition. It was as if something was approaching my life, something I couldn't stop or avoid, something that would change not only that day, but the entire story I told about myself, and especially the story my son told about who I was. The world had become different. I knew that, but I still didn't know why. All I knew was that that car, those glances, those whispers, were the prologue to something big, much bigger than I imagined. And life, which just a few hours before seemed to have shrunk me, was about to place me at the center of something that no one, not me, not my son, could ever have predicted. The storm had passed, but something bigger was coming with the wind, and I was about to find out what it was. The tension of that day was already high enough to keep me on edge, but what happened next surpassed any silent warning I had perceived before. I was in the room trying to gather my thoughts, breathing deeply like someone trying to stitch together what little dignity remains, when I heard the sound that shattered what little calm I still had. A knock on the door, but it wasn't a normal knock, one of those light, shy ones from someone in a hurry but not wanting to bother anyone. It was a firm, heavy knock that reverberated through the wood as if it were an urgent call, the kind of knock that makes the heart leap immediately, as if someone had pulled a hidden alarm inside the chest. I stopped. The sound echoed throughout the entire house. For a moment I was completely still. Even the air seemed to stop circulating. I felt my breath quicken, short and ragged. My eyes automatically went to the door, but it took my body a few seconds to follow. That wasn't a familiar knock. It wasn't the way my son knocked impatiently when he forgot his keys. It wasn't the way the neighbors knocked, always in a hurry or overly polite. It wasn't even the kind of knock someone makes to deliver late mail. It was something else, something more serious, most urgent, more unexpected. My step toward the door was slow, almost calculated, as if part of me wanted to find out who it was, and part of me wanted to buy time to prepare for anything. The room seemed too long. Each step echoed as if I were walking through a tunnel. My hands began to sweat, and I felt a nervous tingling in my fingertips. Along the way, my thoughts wandered through all the possibilities, and none of them were easy. Could that be my son? Has he come back? If he had come back to finish the fight, my heart wouldn't have been able to take another blow. I didn't know if I would have the strength to hear anything more at that moment. Maybe he had reconsidered, slammed the door like that out of desperate regret, or out of even more pent-up anger. I didn't know which scenario scared me more. Could it be a neighbor? Someone coming to complain about noise, even if there hadn't been any? Someone curious, wanting to know why that strange car had passed by the street earlier? Or worse, someone wanting to spread rumors, trying to find out if something was wrong at that house. Could it be a bigger problem? For a second, a chill ran through my body. Bad news usually arrives with a loud bang. Police officers bang like that. Social workers bang like that. Urgent messengers bang like that. The kind of visit that rarely brings good news. My chest tightened. I kept walking. The beat came again, even firmer than the first. Tock, tock, tock. The sound seemed to make the door frame vibrate. The second impact startled me slightly. It was impossible to ignore now. Whoever it was important. I took 2 more steps, getting close enough to feel the cold air coming through the crack at the bottom of the door. My hand hesitated at the doorknob. I felt my pulse pound there, as if my whole body was reacting even before I decided what to do. My breathing quickened, my stomach churned, and for a moment I wished I could freeze time, because there is a moment, just before opening a door, when your life is still the same, and after you open it, she may never be again. I pressed my ear against the wood. I heard no breathing on the other side. I heard no footsteps, only silence. A silence that wasn't empty. It was expectant, as if whoever was there knew I was standing just inches away, trying to decipher the invisible presence behind the wood. Retreat? Should I open it? Do I pretend I'm not home? None of the options seemed reasonable. As I took a deep breath, a third knock came, louder than the previous ones. Not a request, a summons. The kind of knock that doesn't take no for an answer. My whole body froze. With a dry throat, I managed to gather enough courage to ask, in a low, almost trembling voice, "Who is it?" No response. Just one more second of absolute silence. I placed my hand on the doorknob. I felt the cold, firm metal, as if it were testing my resolve. Inside, my heart felt ready to burst out of my chest. I turned the doorknob slowly, savoring each internal click. It was as if the door was resisting, as if the whole house was holding its breath along with me. I opened it just a crack, enough to see a towering shadow in front of the door, enough to realize that he wasn't my son, not even a neighbor, not even anyone I recognized. A pair of impeccably polished dress shoes appeared first. Then, the hem of a neatly trimmed pair of trousers, much more carefully maintained than anyone in my neighborhood usually wore. I slowly raised my gaze, and I could see the outline of someone who exuded authority down to the smallest detail: firm posture, dark suit, serious expression, and a presence so imposing it seemed to push the air into the house. My heart raced. I didn't know who it was, but I knew it wasn't an ordinary visit. I opened the door a little more, just enough to see his face clearly, and at that exact moment, before he even said a word, I felt my life was about to change. Who was standing at my door? It wasn't just anyone. He was someone who would never, ever show up in that neighborhood without a reason, and his gaze said it all. I had been found. What I didn't know yet, I had no idea, was why, but that was just the beginning. The turnaround was only just beginning. When I finally opened the door completely, the street air rushed in along with a presence that, in itself, seemed to change the temperature of the room. For a full second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Perhaps my tired mind was creating an illusion, something born from the tension accumulated in the last few hours. But it wasn't an illusion. It was real. So real that I felt my legs almost give way. Before me was the mayor of the city. Yes, him. The man whose picture was on every billboard on that main avenue, whose speeches were broadcast on television, whose imposing figure only appeared at the most important events in the region. He was there, in front of my simple door, on my humble street, in my neighborhood forgotten by official maps. And he wasn't alone. 2 people, advisors, secretaries, I can't say for sure, were right behind him, holding folders, tablets, and with serious expressions, as if that visit had been planned with military precision. For a few seconds, I simply froze. I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even comprehend how that scenario was possible. My mind was spinning, trying to find a plausible reason. Some construction in the neighborhood, some social project, some address error, anything that would make sense. But nothing, absolutely nothing, seemed to fit. The mayor was at my door, and that defied all logic. He stared at me for a moment, not arrogantly, not superiorly, but with a kind of respect I wasn't used to receiving, even from ordinary people, let alone public figures. His expression was serious, professional, but there was something in his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, that left me even more bewildered. His clothes were impeccable, a suit of fine fabric, a perfectly aligned tie, shoes shining as if they had never touched the ground of this city. When he spoke, his voice was firm, deep, and full of authority, the kind of voice that makes you straighten your posture automatically, even without realizing it. "Good afternoon. Are you Mr. Name?" "My name." "My name." He knew my name. That made my heart race in a strange, uncomfortable way. I swallowed hard before answering. Yes, it's me." He nodded, as if that confirmed something important, as if I were, at that moment, a necessary piece in a puzzle I didn't even know existed. "I'm the mayor," he said, even though he knew I had already recognized him. "We're here because we need to talk to you." The "we need." It pierced me like a cold wind. You? Why? What did I have to do with the city hall? Politics? The city? None of that made sense. For a few moments, I thought it might be something bad. Some problem involving taxes, paperwork, some bureaucratic situation lost in time. But, at the same time, there was something different in their expressions. They didn't seem hostile. They didn't seem to be there to deliver bad news. They seemed on a mission, as if they were there to accomplish something greater, and that only increased the confusion in my head. The aides observed everything as if I were someone important, someone who deserved that official visit. But that only made me even more uncomfortable, because nothing in my life justified such formality. I was an ordinary person, simple, a worker who struggled to survive, who fought to secure the basics, who faced more defeats than victories. I was nobody more than that. I wasn't someone who deserved the presence of a mayor at my doorstep. "Can we come in?" he asked. The question was polite, but with a weight that indicated it was serious. It seemed less like an option and more like a necessary step for what was to come. I felt my throat go dry. I glanced quickly inside the house. Messy, a reflection of the emotional storm of that morning, and wanted to ask for 5 minutes to tidy everything up, but I couldn't. I just took a step back, making space. "Of course. Please." The mayor entered first, with firm, confident steps, looking around as if carefully assessing the surroundings. The two aides followed behind, discreet but attentive to every detail. I felt small, extremely small, and at the same time extremely exposed. My thoughts were out of control, racing back and forth like birds trapped inside a locked room. Nothing made sense. Nothing. The question that hammered in my head was simple and desperate. Why did the city's mayor come to my house? I looked at him, trying to find some clue in his expression, some indication that would prepare me for what I was about to hear. But there was nothing there but seriousness, and a strange kind of respect that made me even more uneasy. He sat down in the armchair. The aides stood, and I remained before them like someone who had been called to a meeting he hadn't asked for, but on which something important depended. My hands trembled slightly. My breathing was irregular, and for a moment, I wondered if it was possible to faint simply from nervousness. The mayor crossed his hands in his lap, looked me directly in the eyes, and said something that made my stomach churn. "There is something you need to know, something that has been hidden for many years, and the time has come to clarify everything." My heart stopped. It literally stopped for a second. My mind was filled with possibilities and fear. He continued, "We are here because you did something very important, more than you can imagine." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Anything important? You? What could I have done to get the attention of the city hall, the mayor, an entire team? And before I could formulate the question, he finished, with a calmness that only increased my despair. "And to this day, almost no one knows this. But the time for recognition has come." My mouth went dry, my hands went cold, and my son's phrase returned to my mind like a ghost. "You are nobody." But in front of the mayor, something told me that this was about to change, much more than I could have imagined. The mayor took a deep breath before continuing. He wasn't the type of person to hesitate when speaking. I realized that quickly. He had presence, firmness, a natural authority that made anyone straighten their posture. But at that particular moment, there was something different about him, an almost respectful serenity, a gentle gravity, as if he were about to address something profoundly human, not just bureaucratic. I stood there, unsure where to put my hands, trying to understand what was happening. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. The mayor looked me straight in the eyes, not like a political figure looking at a voter, but like one man looking at another, acknowledging something important, something that, until that moment, I didn't even know existed. He started calmly. "First of all, I'd like to thank you for opening your home. To us," he said, nodding slightly. "I know it's not common to receive a visit like this, and I know you must be wondering why." I simply nodded. My mouth seemed incapable of forming words. The mayor continued. "My name, as you know, is Claudio Menezes. I am the mayor of this city, but today I am not here merely as an authority. I am here as someone who owes you something. Something very big." That hit me like a lightning bolt. "Do you owe me something? You? What could I possibly have done to make a mayor, a figure completely outside my world, owe me anything?" He motioned for me to sit down. I obeyed, still not understanding anything. The aides remained standing in absolute silence, as if they were witnessing a moment that didn't concern them, but which they knew was too important to interrupt. The mayor crossed his hands, took a deep breath, and then said, "We came here because you did something in the past that completely changed someone's life. And the most impressive thing is, nobody knew about it. You never talked about it. You never sought recognition. You never boasted. You simply did it and went on with your life. My whole body went cold. I tried searching my memory for something grand, something worthy of such a declaration, but nothing came to mind. My whole life has always been simple, unremarkable, made up of small efforts and small gestures. Nothing that deserved an official visit, thanks or tributes. I don't understand," I murmured, almost voicelessly. What did I do?" The mayor kept his eyes on mine, as if he understood the confusion. Then he began to explain, and each word that came out of his mouth seemed more surreal than the last. "Many years ago," he said, "a boy from our town was involved in a very serious accident, an accident that could have left him with permanent injuries, or worse. He was a humble boy, the son of a single mother who worked all day to take care of him. They had no resources, they had no support, and on that particular day, everything seemed lost." I felt a shiver run down my spine. That story. I'd heard something similar before, a long, long time ago. "But," the mayor continued, "there was someone there, someone who was passing by and saw what was happening. That person didn't think twice, didn't run away, didn't back away, didn't wait for someone more capable to arrive. That person acted." My heart started racing. I knew what he was talking about. Suddenly, the memory came back like a fast-forwarded movie. A bicycle on the ground, an unconscious boy, blood, a desperate mother, and me, running, carrying the boy in her arms, taking him to the hospital without a second thought, even without a car, even without money to pay for transportation, even without knowing if I would be guilty of anything. I just did it. I never told anyone, not even for my family, not even for my friends, not even for my own son. I never thought it was anything noteworthy. I was just helping a boy in danger. But the mayor continued. "That boy was my cousin." My stomach turned. My whole body froze. My chest tightened. "If it weren't for you," he continued, his voice firm, "he would have died that day. You were the one who carried him to the emergency room. You were the one who called for help. You were the one who stayed with him until his mother arrived. And," his voice softened, "you were the one who paid for the initial tests, even though you didn't have much." I closed my eyes for a moment. This wasn't a memory I revisited often. It was something I did on impulse, in desperation, in the rawest humanity. I knew it had been important, but I never imagined anyone would remember. I never imagined anyone would know it was me. The mayor continued. "That boy's mother told him this story many times, but she never knew his name. She only said, 'the man who saved his life.' My cousin grew up with this desire to find this person. Until recently, we discovered who it was. And we discovered something even deeper. The man didn't just save his life. He saved his future." He took a deep breath and said, with an emotion I didn't expect to see in a public figure, "My cousin is a doctor now, an excellent doctor. He dedicates his career to saving lives, because someone, many years ago, saved his." I felt my eyes welling up with tears, My chest burned with a mixture of surprise, disbelief, and something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. The mayor continued, "And I came, personally as an authority figure, but mainly as a human being, to thank you for what you have done. Because you are not nobody. You are exactly the kind of person who makes a difference without the world even realizing it." The phrase struck me like a bolt of lightning. It mingled with the pain I was carrying. She was shocked by the cruel words my son had said hours earlier. I brought my hand to my face, trying to hold back my emotions. The mayor concluded firmly, "You changed a destiny, and that is greater than any title, any position, any wealth." At that moment, I realized that my life, which I believed to be small, had an impact that went far beyond what I had imagined. And all of this whole revelation, was about to turn the key my son needed to discover who I really was. I was nobody. I never went. And finally, someone came along to prove it. When the mayor finished telling the story, that story I myself had buried in my memory as something small, something anyone could have done. I was still completely still. Something inside me trembled, not with fear, but with an emotion so profound it seemed to touch layers of my soul I had forgotten existed. It was as if, after years of seeing myself as someone ordinary, unremarkable, too simple to be remembered, someone had finally shone a light directly on me. But the mayor wasn't finished yet. He gestured to one of his aides, who immediately opened an elegant, thick folder with the city's golden coat of arms, emblazoned on the cover. I recognized that symbol. It appeared at official ceremonies, public events, and important announcements from the city hall. It was the kind of object that never circulated among ordinary citizens like me. It was reserved for honored individuals, renowned business people, civil servants who had dedicated decades to the municipality, figures who had marked local history. And now, that folder was being opened right there, in my simple living room with worn furniture in a house that hasn't even been painted in years. The aide took out a heavy, finely textured envelope made of special paper. He handed it to the mayor with a respectful, almost ceremonial gesture. The mayor stood up, and when he stood up, with his firm posture and presence that filled the room, I felt my heart race again, as if I were about to witness something impossible. He walked toward me with slow, solemn steps. I stood up almost unconsciously, guided by instinct, by the moment, by the symbolic weight that settled before me. The mayor stopped a few inches away, opened the envelope, and took out a beautifully crafted framed document. The edges were adorned with gold details, and in the center, large, bold letters announced something I never imagined I would see associated with my name: Certificate of Honor and Merit, Exceptional Humanitarian Service. I felt my vision blur for a moment. My name was right below. My name, featured, as if he were worthy of being there. The mayor held the ball, frame with both hands, and said, with a firmness that struck me as absolute truth, "This certificate is an official recognition from the city, on behalf of the mayor's office and the Department of Health. It is awarded to citizens who have performed extraordinary acts, acts that saved lives, transformed paths, and created impacts that go beyond their own existence. And you are one of those citizens." I felt my hands trembling. I didn't know whether I should take the certificate, say something, or just cry. But before I could react, he continued, and each word seemed to undo, one by one, the wounds my son had inflicted hours before. That day, many years ago, you could have gone on your way. You could have ignored the accident. You could have pretended not to see it. But you didn't. You risked your time, your money, your own peace of mind to save a boy you didn't know. You did it without expecting anything in return, without seeking praise, without asking for thanks. That kind of gesture, he took a deep breath, is rare, very rare. My throat tightened. The mayor looked me in the eyes with a sincerity no politician could fake, and said, "I heard someone told you today that you are nobody." My heart stopped. The phrase came like a sharp blade, cutting straight into the fresh scar from the fight with my son. I lowered my gaze. feeling the pain resurface for a moment. But the mayor took a step closer and spoke, his voice firm and laden with purpose. "Allow me to correct that." I slowly raised my head. He held the certificate between us and declared, with the authority of a leader and the emotion of a human being, "You are nobody. You are somebody who changed this city. You are someone who saved a life, and because of that, saved many others that doctor would later care for. You are someone whose actions have extended far beyond what you could ever have imagined." I felt the phrase enter me like a ray of light in a dark room. It wasn't just recognition. It was validation. It was dignity restored. It was the reconstruction of something that my son, in the impulsiveness of his grief, had destroyed hours before. The mayor then extended the certificate toward me, and I finally took it. The weight of the frame seemed symbolic. It wasn't actually heavy, but it carried the weight of years of invisible effort, years of anonymity, years of sacrifice that no one had seen until now. The aides began discreetly taking photographs, capturing the yo moment as if it were an official ceremony. And, in a way, it was. Not a ceremony marked on the city's calendar, but a ceremony marked on the calendar of my life. A turning of the page that I would never have had the courage to write alone. The mayor concluded, "The city thanks you. My family thanks you. And I, personally, thank you for everything you have done. Your story needed to be told, and today, finally, it is being told." I couldn't answer. I simply held the certificate with trembling hands, feeling a mixture of pride, astonishment, and emotion that almost made me crumble. His words kept echoing in my mind, filling every empty space left by my son's cruel cry, "You are nobody. You are someone who has changed this city." At that moment I knew, from that day on, not even I, not even my son, we would see my story in the same way. I was still holding the certificate in trembling hands, trying to absorb what had just happened, when I heard the sound that made my heart stop for a second. The door opening. It wasn't a sudden opening like someone arriving in a rage. It wasn't a discreet entry like someone trying not to be noticed. It was a somewhat hesitant, almost indecisive sound, as if the person on the other side was unsure whether to enter or retreat. When I turned around, I saw my son standing in the doorway, his eyes wide, completely bewildered by what he was seeing. He wasn't expecting anyone there, much less the mayor, much less photographers, aides, official documents. And he definitely didn't expect to see his own father, the one he had called nobody hours before, holding a certificate of honor and merit. The shock was so evident that his expression looked like someone who had just seen a ghost. The backpack slipped from his shoulders and fell to the ground without him even noticing. His eyes darted from the mayor to me, from me to the picture frame in my hand, from the frame to the aides, as if his mind were trying to assemble a puzzle whose final image simply didn't make sense. For a few seconds, he said nothing, absolutely nothing, and it was in that silence, a silence so different from the one that reigned after the fight, that an avalanche of emotions began to show on his face. First came confusion, then a kind of almost childlike disbelief, next shame. A shame so profound that it felt like the ground was about to collapse beneath his feet. The mayor noticed his presence and did something that surprised me even more. He gave me a respectful smile. "Ah, you must be the gentleman's son, my name. It arrived at just the right time," he said, in a welcoming tone that contrasted with the tension that filled the air. My son blinked a few times as if he were trying to wake up from a strange dream. I didn't know I had visitors," she murmured, her voice weak, almost lost. It was the first time in months that I had heard his voice without anger, without irony, without that defensive hardness he used as armor. The mayor took a step toward him, not in an authoritarian way, but cordially, almost paternally. He extended his hand. "I am the mayor of the city. Your father has just received a very important honor, something that I'm sure you will be proud to hear." My son hesitated before shaking the mayor's hand. He was disoriented, disarmed, vulnerable. You could see he was desperately trying to understand what was happening, but his brain seemed unable to keep up with the pace of events. The mayor then turned to me and said, "Can I tell him?" I felt a huge lump in my throat. I nodded. My son looked at me at that moment, and in that look there was something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear of having wronged myself. Real fear. Fear of having gone too far. The mayor positioned himself between the two of us, as if he were the narrator of a story that my own son should have heard years ago. "Your father," he said, pointing at me, "saved the life of a member of my family when you were just a little boy. He did something few would do. He acted with courage, with sacrifice, with humanity, and all this without ever expecting recognition. We only recently discovered who he was, and we came, personally, to thank him." My son's eyes widened even more. His face turned pale. It was as if each word was a stone hitting a wall he himself had built within his heart. The mayor continued, "Your father isn't just a good person, he's someone who changed a boy's destiny, and, consequently, the destiny of many other people that boy would help throughout his life. Your father made an immense difference, a difference that no amount of money or status could measure." I saw my son swallow hard. His hands trembled slightly. The shame was so intense it seemed to seep from his pores. The mayor stepped aside, placing himself between us but opening up the field of vision between father and son as if returning something that had been lost. "You're very lucky to have a father like that," he added with a firmness that echoed through the room. The sentence hit my son like a bolt of lightning. He blinked rapidly, looked away, and ran his hand over his eyes, not to wipe away tears, but to stop them from falling. The aides took some notes, photographed a few more formal moments, but the atmosphere had already completely changed. It was no longer an official ceremony. Now it was something intimate, emotional, impossible to ignore. My son tried to speak, but his voice failed him on the first attempt. He tried again, taking a deep breath, and finally succeeded. "Dad, his voice broke. "I didn't know." Those 3 words, simple, small, almost whispered, carried apologies, regrets, fears, guilt, and everything he hadn't had the courage to say before. I felt my chest tighten. The mayor realized that this moment no longer belonged to him. With composure, he gestured to his aides and said, "Let's give you a moment." They stepped back, leaving the room, but they didn't leave the house. They remained in the hallway discreetly, as if they understood that something much bigger than politics was happening inside. My son took 2 steps towards me. He wasn't crying, but his face carried a vulnerability I hadn't seen since he was little, and ran to me for help after a nightmare. "Dad, I treated you very badly today," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I said horrible things." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. I wanted to hear what he had been carrying around for so long. I thought you hadn't accomplished anything in life. I thought," he took a deep breath, sniffed, "I thought you were less than other people's parents. I was wrong. I was very wrong." The wound from that morning still ached, but seeing my son acknowledge his mistake, before the mayor, before the truth, before everything, was something that no wound could prevent from deeply affecting me. He lowered his head, ashamed. I took a step forward, and another, until he was close enough that he slowly lifted his face, his eyes brimming with tears and his soul exposed. "Father," he repeated, broken inside, "forgive me." The entire room seemed to be holding its breath. Life had changed in just a few hours, and there, in that instant, the emotional dynamic between us reached its peak, the moment when the truth shattered any pride, any distance, any resentment. Life had just forced my son to confront me with who I truly was, and that moment would never be forgotten. The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't the heavy silence of grief. It was a fragile silence, charged with emotion about to overflow, as if any word could break through a dam built up over years. The mayor and his aides had stepped aside to give us privacy, but the atmosphere still vibrated with the impact of the revelation. I stood before my son, holding the certificate, my hands still trembling, while he remained there, vulnerable, his eyes red and his breath short. My son tried to speak, but his voice faltered on the first syllable. He swallowed hard, closed his eyes for a second, as if gathering courage, and then said, "Dad." The words came out broken, heavy with regret. "I need to apologize, truly, from the bottom of my heart." I stood there feeling my heart clench. He continued, his hands trembling slightly. "I said horrible things today, things I shouldn't have even thought, much less said. His voice trembled. "I hurt you. I wounded you. And I know I can't go back in time, but I want to explain." He took a deep breath, as if he were about to lift an enormous weight. "I wasn't angry at you. I was angry at myself, at my life, at the way things aren't working out. I looked around and saw people my age growing, achieving things, having opportunities, and I felt small, stuck, trapped. And I started blaming you for it, as if it were your responsibility that I hadn't achieved what I wanted yet. As if you had failed me." He ran, a hand over his face, trying to control his emotion. "I felt frustrated, and taking it out on you was easier than facing my own mistakes, my own choices. I said you hadn't achieved anything, because that's how I felt. I felt like a nobody, and I projected that onto you. That pierced my chest, not as a blow, but as a confession I never imagined I'd hear." He took another step towards me. Now we were so close that I could see every detail on his face. The shame, the weight of regret, the fear of having lost the person who had always been by his side since the first day of his life. "Dad," he said, his eyes filling with tears. "I always saw you as someone strong, but when life started to put pressure on me, I wanted to find someone to blame, and I chose you. Not because it was your fault, but because you were always the most secure, the most present, the one I knew wouldn't leave, and His voice faltered. "I abused that. My chest hurt in a different way now. Not the pain of rejection, but the pain of love that returns, stumbling, wounded, asking for shelter once more. I hurt you," he repeated, swallowing back tears. "I told you you were nobody, and now I see that. I didn't know your story. I didn't know who you really were. I failed you, Dad." It was at that moment that I felt something inside me breaking. Not pain, but resistance. The anger I still carried melted away like ice under the sun. I felt my eyes burning, and before I even realized it, I was breathing, deeply, trying to control my own emotion. I took a step forward, getting so close that I could touch his shoulder. He slowly raised his eyes, waiting for my reaction, and then I spoke. My voice came out low, but laden with everything I had kept inside for years. "Son, I never needed to be someone to the world." The words came out on their own, sincere, naked. "I just wanted to be someone to you." The phrase seemed to have struck him in the deepest place. His eyes immediately filled with tears. He brought his hand to his mouth as if he needed to hold himself back from collapsing. "I know life didn't give me titles," I continued calmly. "I know I didn't have wealth, status, or the brilliant career you might have dreamed of for me. But everything I did, absolutely everything, was trying to give you a better chance than I had. And if I sometimes failed, it was because I was also trying to survive. I'm not perfect. I never was. But," my voice broke, "I've always loved you. With everything I have," he cried. Not out of sadness, not out of anger, but it's about recognition. "Dad," he said, his voice choked with tears, "I should never have said that. Never. You are—" He hesitated, wiping his face. "You are the best man I know." I felt a tear roll down my face. I didn't try to hide it. It was a time when masks weren't necessary. He continued, his voice now breaking. "I want to change. I want to be better. I want to see you as you truly are, and not as a reflection of my frustrations. Please forgive me." I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the overflowing emotion. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder, gently, lovingly, with the kind of affection only a parent understands. "I forgive you, son." My voice came out firm. "I will always forgive you, but I want one thing from you." He looked at me, attentive, vulnerable. "I want you to understand one truth. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You don't need to conquer the world to be someone. You already are someone. To me, you always have been." The word shattered what little emotional armor remained of his. He hugged me, a strong, tight hug, laden with years of distance that finally broke down there. And I hugged him back, with the certainty that that simple conversation, had just changed everything. The relationship that seemed lost had been rediscovered. The truth, at last, had prevailed. The house was silent again, but for the first time that day, it was a gentle silence. A silence of peace, of recovered breath, of wounds beginning to heal. The mayor and his aides had already left, leaving behind not just a framed certificate, but a truth that had finally come to light. My son and I remained there, sitting side by side on the sofa, as if we were relearning how to occupy the same space after so long separated by things neither of us could name. He was still discreetly wiping his eyes, not wanting to show weakness, but it was precisely in that shy gesture that I saw his humanity. And for the first time in a long time, I saw him as he was when he was little, vulnerable, insecure, but profoundly good. He had always been good. He had just lost his way a little. I looked at the certificate in my hands, that frame gleaming in the dim light of the room, and realized something curious. That piece of paper, despite its importance, wasn't what truly changed my life at that moment. What mattered was what it had revealed, not just to me, but especially to my son. A person's life is not measured by the size of the position they held, the amount of money in their bank account, or the praise they received. A person's life is measured by the gestures no one saw, the sacrifices no one applauded, the silent acts that change the course of stories that will never be ours. My son watched me in silence. I could feel his gaze trying to understand who I was, not the father he thought he knew, but the man he had never stopped to see. And in that instant, I felt a deep need to say something that made sense, that would close that painful cycle that had begun hours before with a scream that almost destroyed everything. I took a deep breath. I looked at him calmly, and I spoke in a low but firm voice. Son, sometimes the person the world calls nobody is precisely the one who carries the greatest stories. The sentence hung in the air for a moment, as if the whole house were listening. My son blinked slowly, absorbing each word. He didn't answer. Immediately, he simply let the truth settle within him. I didn't know you'd been through all that, he finally said, his voice breaking. I didn't know you'd saved someone. I had no idea. She smiled in a sad but genuine way. Many things we do in life don't have witnesses, son, and they don't need them. Doing good isn't something we count. It's something we live. He looked away, took a deep breath, and then turned back to me with an expression that mixed guilt, pride, and a love he hadn't known how to show in a long time. I wish I had been a better son, he murmured. I wish I had seen you sooner. I wish I had seen who you really are. That phrase struck me right in the heart, but in a good way, like receiving something you've waited years for without admitting it. I put my hand on his shoulder and replied, What matters is not what has happened in the past. It's what we do from now on. He nodded, visibly moved, and in that small gesture, I saw something being rebuilt between us, something I thought was lost, trust. Little by little, we started talking, not about the fight, not about guilt, not about pain, but about us, about dreams, about the future, about mistakes that become lessons. My son told me things he had been keeping inside for a long time, insecurities, frustrations, comparisons that suffocated him, and I listened to everything, without judgment, because that's what he needed. Maybe that's what I always wanted him to know, that I was there to listen to him, even when he couldn't hear himself. He also asked me about the day of the accident, a day I had kept as a distant, almost erased memory. I told him everything. I told him how I found the boy, how I ran without thinking, how I stayed at the hospital until his mother arrived, how I paid what I could even without knowing how I would manage the following month. I didn't tell these things with pride, but with sincerity, because they were part of me, a part he never had the chance to know. My son listened as if he had discovered a hidden hero, and I almost laughed at that because I never saw myself as a hero. I was just a man trying to do the right thing. I always have been. After a long, reflective silence, he said, Dad, you are nobody. The sentence came out clean, without fear, no wounded pride. That's just true. And I felt the healing begin there, slowly but surely. That day began with a cruel accusation, but it ended with a story being revealed. It ended with my son discovering that behind the simplicity of my life, there were pages he had never read, pages made of courage, sacrifice, and humanity. And I discovered something else, too. Sometimes life needs to break us down a little, to reveal what was hidden inside. When night fell, and the house returned to its natural silence, I realized that the world outside hadn't changed, but the two of us had. We had changed, and that was what mattered. My son stood up, came over to me, and hugged me again, this time without haste, without shame, without hesitation, just a sincere hug from son to father, a hug that said, I see you now. I closed my eyes and smiled, because in the end, all I ever wanted was this. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more profound and insightful stories like this one. And tell me, have you ever been underestimated by someone you love?